Welcome to Pay Attention, interviews about truth in troubling times. And today I'm here with David Phillips, and Dr. Phillips is Associate Professor Emeritus of Information at the University of Toronto, whose interdisciplinary emphasis is expressed in his studies of surveillance, queer theory, and infrastructure. Dr. Phillips is the author of many works exploring relations among information, economics, ideology, policy, culture, identity, and technology. His most recent works involve theater and performance as pedagogy and research. And so I welcome you, David. It's wonderful to have you here.
Great to see you, Polly.
And David and I are old friends. I've known him for a long time, and I'm especially happy to speak with him today about a range of topics that have to do with your expertise, because you have a very unique kind of expertise that draws on surveillance on that side of technology and also on the creative side of technology. And it's that's kind of a pleasure, because I think when I knew you years ago, David, I had no idea why you'd be interested in surveillance. I thought I could understand the creative side of technology, but I was like, whew, why would anybody be interested in surveillance? And now, as it turns out, you were prescient. So that's kind of wonderful that you put it all together. And I want to start then with a little bit about your background and your interests, because they do combine topics that are typically not associated, like queer theory, surveillance, and technology. So how did you get to that combination of topics?
It was the late 80s. I was working in a computer science department. I was teaching computer programming. And this was at the beginning of the internet boom. I was an early adopter of email. So I remember, when email came into the department and stuff. And I was also and so there were mailing lists, there was communities forming online, and that was new to me. And I was also going to faculty meetings where we were playing for government funding and things like that. So I was seeing both the politics of research, and I was seeing this sort of cultural growth, cultural development online. And I then went to get my Ph.D. And my advisor was a surveillance scholar, Oscar Gandy. So I became what happened was that what Oscar gave me more than anything was sort of a grounding to my paranoia. This sort of sense that they're out there, they're watching, they're doing stuff to us. And Oscar helped me, both gave me and helped me develop a useful framework for understanding that.
Let me just ask you, when you say that Oscar said they're out there and they're doing stuff to us,
I was the one thinking somehow something's wrong here,
Right.
That somehow there are powers at work that I don't understand and that are acting upon me.
Right.
And it was Oscar who gave us sort of theoretical framework for understanding that flow of power, and so a way of engaging with it without paranoia.
I get the kind of good health for your paranoia side of it, because that's true. That there is healthy paranoia for sure, and also there's paranoia that just produces a lot of anxiety and not much else. But what I was wondering about is if your mentor had a background in understanding the beginnings of the internet, or DARPA, or the ways that the CIA might have been involved with Google, or any of those kinds of early things that I would not have known about at all.
Right.
Did your mentor have a background in any of that? Or?
No, that far more than, and I still believe this, that far more than government intervention, or I am much more concerned about capital.
The corporate side
Yeah,
of things.
I'm much more concerned about corporate surveillance and the way that we
Mhm.
are manipulated in order to produce profit. Now, of course, those things are interrelated,
Right.
but certainly my entry into it was from corporate surveillance and corporate manipulation.
Right, right. And so that was where your mentor
Yeah.
also had interest and could uh, guide you. What did you do your dissertation on?
My dissertation was actually on electronic cash, and it was
Mm,
so. But let me say that
mm,
what I became interested in was encryption. And I became interested in encryption because it was at that time a really hot political topic. It was a relatively new technology. No one knew what to do with it. There were a lot of interested, powerful actors trying to figure out how we were going to deal with strong encryption. So,
mhm.
so that is where that's kind of where I was going with this. I was looking at electronic cash as a form of encryption, and
Oh,
um, so so I do want to actually bring in the technology studies here, because as part of simply the milieu where I went to school, there was an emphasis on technology studies, which was technology as socially constructed as it's not the problem isn't ever encryption, or the problem isn't ever the machine. The problem is the machine as it is implicated in structures of power, as it is used, as it is part of what I call infrastructure, that is relationships of money, law, culture, and technology, that they all linked together, and you cannot really understand any particular technology without seeing how it is implicated in all of these things. What are the laws around it? What does it actually do? How does it actually work? But what are the laws around it? What's the money around it? And how do people feel about it? How do people use it? How is it
right.
in our way of life?
Just now, I'm listening to Sherry Turkle's new
Oh,
book,
great.
Empathy Diaries,
Mm-hmm.
which is giving me a very clear picture of what was happening at MIT
Mm-hmm.
during the early time of the internet,
Mm-hmm.
and the interests there about particularly AI, and how AI was going to be used in relation to humans.
Right.
And then all the questions about consciousness, like, can AI become conscious, et cetera. I just want to say that you were at the University of Pennsylvania, which I happen to know, which probably had a different emphasis from MIT at around the same period of time. I think Sherry was at MIT, started there as a young faculty or new faculty in the late 70s. But all of this conversation about what does this kind of technology mean for humans and human relationships, and how are we going to deal with it? And you're dealing more with the sort of encryption infrastructure, that side of it, but the implications for human relationship in relation to money and power, I take it, than to the nature of consciousness, let's say.
Well, we'll get to queer theory.
Oh, okay.
Right?
Okay.
Okay. So I'm just trying
Okay.
to put all these pieces together, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
It's true. My background, is there's a lot in it. It's broad.
It's very
Um,
broad. So yes.
but,
So then let's go to queer theory.
okay, I
Yeah.
have to mosey into it a little bit here.
Okay.
Because I was at a school of communication there, and part of that was about mass media. Mass media is about audience production. And so a lot of this was about how algorithms, surveillance algorithms, create audiences in order that audiences might be manipulated. And audience production is about forming ideal types of people. It's about recognizing particular kinds of people in particular kinds of moments in order to nudge them to do a particular thing. Right? Does that make sense?
Well, the part that doesn't really is forming. I mean, I could see like, something like, let's say, herding or gathering,
Yes.
but forming ideal
Yeah.
types of people. That's an interesting.
Right. My sense is, and my sense as informed by some reading in queer theory, is that as you are addressed as a certain type of person, as you are recognized as a certain type of person, there is a reification that goes on. That you do actually become, whatever that means. You respond as that sort of person. And you might look for mirrors of yourself, but you also look for ways to be. And so that there's that dynamic between recognizing yourself and creating yourself. That is part of this dynamic of identity production.
Yes.
And what you might think of demographics, especially marketing demographics, market research, as sort of the industrialization of identity production. You have your ideal identities to choose from, and that does, that's not say that you are pushed or constrained by these, but you are, it's the palette that you're working with.
Right. And it's a controlled palette once it comes in as social media.
Yes. As one of my early research projects, I did some field work in a company whose product was a pseudonymity software. Again, this was encryption. We're still in encryption here, so that you could log on to the internet as one. So I could log on as David, I could log on as Dr. Phillips, I could log on as Corky, and so I would have these three different personas that I could use, and they couldn't be connected. And so I just started playing with that, and they were out to change the world, and that appealed to me because that got into the techno, thing. How do you change the world? Politically, culturally, economically, whatever. All these ways to change the world. So as I played with this software suite that they called Freedom, I thought, God, this is a lot like being in the closet. This is a lot like negotiating in the closet. Such care about not mixing your personas, and so that's when I really started. That's when it all kind of came together for me. That I thought I could use my lived experience as a gay man and my academic, all these different academic influences to actually say something that was fairly original.
No, I can see now. I can see the boom in it, and I really hadn't understood that previously. But yes, it is like being in the closet, and I've seen people in therapy who actually have an avatar that they live through online that is completely apparently different from the life they're living in ordinary reality, and those are kept separate.
I mean, are they very careful about being sure that, say, their employer doesn't know that that's their avatar?
Not so much anymore, I think. At the beginning, I think, like, a lot of people, the beginning of my career, a lot of people were really careful about S&M.
Yeah.
And then there was like conventions in S&M, and so it sort of exploded. But the thing that I think is the interesting thing is that these kinds of dual lives are often kept more or less secret from partners and close people, not necessarily employers, but the people who might feel cheated of that side of your being that you may be giving to some other reality.
Mhm.
But that is like, it's like being in the closet. It's like having some way of being over here and then some way of being over there,
Yeah.
and having one of them seem more real or authentic,
Yeah.
or
Yeah.
at least really different from the
And
other one. Yeah.
and also, I want to bring out the political component here, because coming out is a political tactic, you know.
Yeah.
So the whole issue of how to deploy, I start speaking in academic speak, how to use your identity, you know, how to use your identity
Yeah.
effectively, and you know, when to be this way and when to be that way as a conscious tactic or strategy for
Okay.
claiming some kind of social position.
Yeah.
And that is what really one of the things that really concerns me about surveillance, because you are ascribed a social position and you have no idea what it is or how it's being used.
Let's say a little bit more about that. I mean, now we're
Yes.
getting in towards, I mean, a lot of people have seen Social Dilemma, have seen
Yes.
that program. And I mean, I would have felt better about it had it not been produced by one of the big media companies, you know, because it did make me wonder about it,
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
how you know, how frank can you be? But this idea of surveillance and clustering
Yes.
and identity, if you could kind of get to that and talk about what the, you know, what's the intention, what are the motivations,
Sure.
and then
Sure.
what are the problems? Yeah.
Sure. Just a little bit it's
Yeah.
almost a non sequitur now, but just because you mentioned Social Dilemma, I want to just put in a plug for Coded Bias. It's a documentary that, you know, focuses on the same sort of thing, and I like it better.
Well, trying to put together this issue of clustering, which is,
Yes.
you know, what you've particularly,
Okay. Yeah.
you know, and then along with surveillance
Yeah.
and how that's used
Yeah.
to manipulate us, you know, what's
Yeah.
the motivation, and then anything else about it, because I think it's a
Okay.
big
Yeah.
topic right
Yeah.
now.
Yeah. Yeah. It is. I have a theater piece called Clusterfucked.
Right. Which
And
is great, and you can see on your website, which we
yeah.
will put up. You
Yeah.
people
Yeah.
can see it
Yeah.
on there.
Yeah, so almost all of my research, I just stumble into something that looks really interesting, and I luckily it's sometimes fruitful. But I really just happened into some not quite PR, some documents from a demographic company. And the demographic company was Environics Canada, and they had established 66 ideal Canadian identities. They said, you know, they were a demographics company, and they said, here is the demographics of Canada, and here's how we came up with these 66 ideal identities, and here is their value. I mean, they're ranked. They're ranked.
In terms of their monetary value, you mean?
Well, hard, you know, to get them actually really pinned down about what it is, but yeah, I guess their monetary value. And of course, you notice that there are a million different kinds of rich white people. There are just a million kinds of rich white people, meaning, I'm sorry, I should be a little bit scholarly. You know, there are a dozen, a dozen, 2 dozen kinds of rich white people. And there's one sort of First Nation. You know, there's only one kind of First Nations person, you know, but there are, you know, 35 different kinds of wealthy white people.
To clarify something too, when you say ideal, your ideal, you mean like a paradigm. You don't mean like
exactly.
Exactly. Because I
mean,
if people listen, they might think like ideal, but you mean it's a paradigm for a particular type.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. Yes. All this material, they're actually really forthcoming. You could just go to their website, and they really had a lot about how these 66 types of people, you know, how these 66 identities were formed, and they are formed by cluster analysis. And I want to talk just a little bit, if I can, about what that means.
Yes.
What basically you do with cluster analysis It's a kind of a form of data mining. You get all the you get all the data you can. You get all the data you can, and you first you have to establish kind of a nearness measure. You have to say, okay, a poor, healthy white person. I'm just kind of making this up.
Right.
Are they closer to, which is closer, a poor healthy white person and a poor healthy black person, or a poor healthy white person and a rich healthy white person? You have to decide which of those are nearer. Okay, and that's a value judgment. Okay, that's a value judgment right there. Okay, to say that these people are more alike than these people.
Now, that's not a data analysis point. I mean,
it is. Eventually it becomes a data analysis point, but you use that nearness measure in your data analysis. But first, you have to come up with a nearness measure. And that nearness measure is really, what I don't know, what looks near to you,
So it's just say some team's idea or something like that.
Exactly. About what the world kind of looks like,
to a Canadian somewhere.
Right. Or what the world looks like usefully to our clients. Okay.
Yeah.
So you have this guess about what will sell, and then you have all this data, and you have all this data. You have a certain nearness measure, and you say, well, let's split it up into 50 groups, and you say which 50 groups are most alike. How do we split up this population so that the people within a group, we maximize the nearness within a group, and we I'm sorry, not speak in, we minimize the distance within groups, and we maximize the distance between groups. Okay, so it's a pure mathematical, it's heavily computational, which is why it wasn't, it's not a form of statistics that was used before the 70s or the 80s, because they just didn't have the computing power for it.
That's right.
So you end up with this clustering. You say you have these sorts of people who are relatively near each other. You have these sorts of persons who are relatively near each other. You have these sorts of persons who are relatively near each other. And then you can sort of, it rationalizes your approach to the population. If you can say, within this population, there's a 65% chance that each individual would respond to an appeal to nationalism. All right. Then you know how to nudge that population, or you know how to spend your resources. If what you have handy is an appeal to nationalism, you deploy that nationalism over here, and it's likely to turn a profit.
Match, right.
And so you can nudge these populations in a particular way. And that is the crux of, it's remarkable how scandals come and go, but one of the earliest scandals of the Trump administration, even before he was elected, was the Cambridge Analytics.
Cambridge Analytics.
Their involvement in the election, which was basically sharing of that kind of demographic data between the campaign and shadow Russian, influencers. Right?
Okay.
So if the campaign can say, we got to turn this, we really got to turn this county, then the demographics company can say, oh, well, that county has this sort of demographics in it, and that sort of demographics are likely to respond to this kind of appeal, so we will shoot that kind of appeal to that county. So that nudging of populations is to my mind, that's surveillance. That
I
is
see.
surveillance activity. Because all of the data that came in order to create those clusters and to understand their similarity or distance from each other was gleaned from everybody's everyday activities.
Right, right. So that's the interactive, like when I'm on Zoom, Zoom is using me and I'm using Zoom, right? I mean, so I'm on Zoom a lot now,
Yes.
and
Yeah.
I've been concerned about people speaking to me in ways that would be confidential in my consulting room, even though the Zoom is encrypted. I ask people not to speak about things that are illegal, because if I'm using Zoom and Zoom is using me and somebody says something, I don't know what if I'm here in my room and I don't ever, I mean, previously I'd never used anything digital involved with my therapy at all. I mean, I just had kept everything on pen and paper, all my receipts and everything, because I knew I didn't want an electronic trail. And now, because of COVID, I've just been full-time on Zoom, talking to people about their private lives. Zoom's using us, we're using Zoom. And, it's, I guess what I would say is that, to me, that is surveillance.
Yes.
And yet it's also the basis of, I mean, a lot of things that people use, like dating apps. I was just thinking when you were describing, that a lot of the dating apps and the way people do this and this on their dating apps, that I am sure that this is this pretty much has to be the data analytics for dating apps. So the things that are thrown your way, and then you make that more precise, and so the app is picking up your thing and you're picking up the app thing. And so so that goes on, I assume, all the time.
Yes.
On the internet.
May I talk about Google?
Well, of course. I mean, I've seen The Circle. I've read The Circle. And also World Without Mind. And that I looked at the guy who wrote that, Frank Foer, doing his TED Talk, and I realized he probably needs a little Google, but but no, I loved it.
Well, one of the things I actually really liked about Social Dilemma was the talking heads with the directors of marketing, the people who first decided how are we going to monetize this service, and who decided basically to go into an advertising paradigm, and basically to sell audiences. So I just want to harken back a moment to say audience production, because once you say audience production, it gives you a history. It gives you a history and a field of research. It has been going on since the penny press in the late 1800s. The production of audiences for sale to advertisers has been going on for over 100 years now. And so we actually know something about that. And this is a bit of an aside, but I think that's really important, that we remember that we actually do know a lot about industrial regulation. We do know a lot about audience production. We know a lot about monopolies, and so it's not a whole new world here. There's certainly been strategic obfuscation of our history, by powerful actors. It happened in the 90s, telecom policy, who knows anything about that in this day and age, and so you blow away all of the regulations as though, anyway.
I agree with you, and the whole sort of issue, particularly for America, has always been about selling things, or commercialism, corporate life. It seems to me that drives America more than anything else is commercialism. I mean, the US, America. And I think that the thing that's different is the internet. I mean, it's like this goes into people's lives at a depth that nothing else has. But
what Google has, in addition to, I'll mention this and move on, in addition to a vertical monopoly that would be unthinkable 30 years
Yeah.
ago. Unthinkable. But they have it. So in addition to that vertical monopoly, they are sort of in a standard, or the difference isn't in their basic, profit model, which is selling attention, selling attention to advertisers. But what they have is vast data through their search engines, through their Gmail, of just what people are like. The way that just through a search engine, you have so much psychographic information about what do people, how do people think, and how do they put things together. So that kind of nuance, both the nuance of the data that they have and the just vast amount of the data that they have. It is. I'm not saying it's a whole new ballgame, or it's an appreciably new ballgame.
I think it is. Yes,
Yeah.
I think it's remarkably different, actually,
Yeah.
because let's say the idea of privacy, which is apparently a relatively new idea, I understand that. I remember in reading a philosophical text called "Sources of the Self" by now his name I'm going to repress. He's a philosopher from Canada whom I like a great deal. But in any case, he talked about the origins of the word individual, and that word is about as old as Harvard University. So it's not been around that long. The whole concept of individuality is relatively new. And the idea of a private mind came with it.
Yeah.
Before that, it wasn't clear that we had a private mind. So when the Greeks say "know thyself," they mean something different than we do. We have this idea of privacy. We have this idea of individuality. We have the idea that we have a private mind.
Yeah.
And that somehow it's important to be able to think for ourselves.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that is coming close to being erased, I think. The whole thing of having a private mind, being able to think for yourself and so on, because of this data harvesting. Is so massive.
Part of my goal as an academic has been to really shift the focus and shift the language as much as I can from privacy to surveillance, because I think that talking about privacy becomes a morass really, 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 really quickly, both legally, because the legal regime of privacy is a wreck. It's just really complicated and weird, and based on things like and based on individual harm. It's really focused on the individual. I mean, it's privacy, right? It's about privacy, and privacy is so focused on the individual that it doesn't, or it's a leap to use that to understand surveillance, which is actually about manipulating populations for the most part. It's about manipulating people's sense of identity, but and also it's about things that happen in public. If you go to public-private places, I mean, privacy is just a mess in many, many ways. And when does a private decision become a public decision? I mean, look at the abortion situation. Is this private? It's public. So I kind of think with privacy.
Let me just raise one tiny thing here. This is why these conversations take so long. Is that, so, in my line of work as a psychoanalyst, I make a very big distinction between a secret and privacy. And so in families and social groups, secrets are extremely harmful in relation to trust. That if you keep secrets from your partner, from your family members, when they're trusting you, that's different from having privacy.
Yeah.
and being able to do something privately, to think privately, to have your own private time, and so on.
Yeah.
Now, it interests me really in what you're saying, because it's clarifying something from a legal side. I don't think usually about it legally at all.
Right.
I think of more of it psychologically, that I think those two things might interface, though.
Yes.
That yes, identity is influenced, and yes, you're surveilled to influence your identity. And yet, at what point is privacy important in that mix of things,
Right.
so that you can, um, now I'm really wanting to think of the name of this author, but I'm probably not going to remember. But you can, so that you can access your own private mind. And
Mhm.
even if private minds are kind
Mhm.
of delicate, because
Mhm.
they only came into being, let's say, since about the time of Harvard University,
Mhm.
since about the 1600s, about 1645 or something, we've only begun to think of having private minds. Previously, the idea really was that who cares what you're
Yeah.
thinking about,
Yeah. Yeah.
you shouldn't even care. I mean,
Yeah.
it doesn't matter. And so all of these things, I think, are in the mix. I think
Yes.
the issues around identity, the issues around surveillance, but also perhaps even let's say, this freedom, or this capacity, or this even idea that your private thoughts are useful.
Yes.
you know this might be something that is very vulnerable to
Yes.
surveillance.
Yes. Nudge is actually sort of a term of art lately. That when populations, and are you nudging populations or are you nudging individuals?
Right.
But uh, people, what kind of gets me is that how vulnerable we are
Yes.
to these archetypal, it's like, oh God,
Yeah.
I am a cliche. I am a
Yeah.
cliche,
Yeah. Yeah.
and and so cliches are really powerful. I mean, you can appeal. Dog food commercials are really effective,
Right.
and you show me a dog food commercial, I'm like, oh my God.
Right.
So there is this sort of individual vulnerability that is engaged here, that might or might not be
Yes.
privacy. I'm not sure. Again, the reason I shy away from privacy is mostly just because it's too confusing for me. It just means too many things.
Yes, and I can see legally what you're saying about the
Yeah,
private,
yeah,
public,
yeah,
and
yeah,
so on.
yeah,
Yes, but
yeah, yeah, yeah,
but I think we're on to something that's kind of interesting in
yeah.
this way, and we don't have to stay here, but I'm liking it at the moment. So,
Sure.
which is that, okay, cliches. You are a cliche. I'm a cliche. Stereotypes. We don't like stereotypes. Maybe we tolerate cliches better than stereotypes. Um, However, perhaps psychologically, there's something else, that you're not simply a cliche, that there
Right.
is room for a private self, that there
Yeah.
is something that is developing, that allows David Phillips to go, oh, queer theory.
Yes.
Oh, this comes out of this
Yeah.
and this,
Yeah.
because David
Yeah.
Phillips is a particular
Yeah.
individual,
Yeah.
and and
Sometimes I think I'm a confluence of cliches, though. I mean,
right. Well, probably too much internet time.
a unique confluence of cliches.
Well, okay. Unique. Once you add the word unique, you
Yeah,
know,
yeah,
and
yeah.
but I would say part of the reason why I ponder this a lot is the free speech thing, and the fact that a part of my work has always been free association, free speech.
Oh,
Say what
oh,
comes to mind. It's
oh,
never been surveilled.
yeah,
It's never been hampered.
yeah, 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 yeah,
And now, I'm on Zoom,
yeah, yeah.
and say what comes to mind is not exactly what I
No, no.
think is the right
Mm-mm,
way to go.
mm-mm,
So,
mm-mm.
it's like there is something in speech. There is something in associations, in individual minds, that actually is generative
Yeah.
and that brings about things that people do not know in advance. They
Yeah.
simply cannot know them
Yeah.
because they don't know them.
Yeah.
So, all of these things that are the mix of your, individual David Phillips self, who could come up with something that no one else has ever thought of, I think is pretty vulnerable. I think it could be taken
Yeah.
away from you without you knowing it.
Okay, I'm just going to hear you there.
Yeah. I think that this is where marketing kind of interfaces with the rest of my, I'm also vulnerable to marketing, and I've lived in that kind of world and enjoyed it.
Mm-hmm.
However, I also live in this other world, which has always been very private, which is my analytic consulting room that never had Zoom in it before. And, all of these things of sort of harvesting people's thoughts and feelings and harvesting them for stereotypes or cliches or for clusters or to nudge them and so on. I wonder if that's actually, really destructive in a way to
No,
marketing.
I'm sure it is, but here's my little bit of hope there. It's not the first time this has happened. That every time there has been a new media, from the printing press to, through radio, through television, comic books, there's this legitimate concern about how our way of thinking, our way of being is going to be affected. In each of those cases, I mean, these things get institutionalized, and the political fight over how they are institutionalized comes and goes, and of course the power always ends up with the powerful. I mean, there's no question about that. I'm not saying that things are rosy and everything, turns out to be the best of all possible worlds. I hope that my fears of an omniscient, soulless, profit maximizing organization to which my thoughts are subservient is a legitimate fear, but negotiable. I mean, it's like you can see it coming, and we have resources, and we have the politics, and we have the we have the intellectual and historical wherewithal to deal with them, because it is not the first time we've had to deal with something like this. It's different, it's a different form. I'm not saying it is the same thing,
Right.
but it's kind of this same struggle in a different form.
So what would make you hopeful about Google in this regard?
Well, I mean, offhand, anti-monopoly. Anti-monopoly would really go a long way. I mean,
I know.
It is, I am astonished, gobsmacked every time I think of it, that they are permitted to own the Android operating system, the Gmail, Google AdSense, and everything else, the search engine, that they are allowed to own as much as they own is astonishing to me. And also, I have to say, historically anomalous.
I thought, yes, and so that plus Amazon and Facebook and Apple, and so it pretty much, I noticed they're all American companies too.
Yes.
It seems like it's some kind of power that doesn't seem to. I mean, I sort of see governments as scratching at their doors rather than running things.
Yeah. I mean,
so what do you think? Help me be more hopeful.
I don't know. Well, okay. This is what in order to find hope, what I would do.
Yes.
Perhaps, maybe, look at histories of the progressive era. Look at the trust busting, which was vicious and violent and horrible. but and it was I think that was the closest approximation to what we're going through now, with horrible poverty and
Oh,
a
yeah.
few really, really rich monopolists. So that has happened before. There has been a New Deal before.
I
There
know.
has been a progressive era before, and I don't know. I don't know what the necessary preliminaries to a progressive era are, but I do know that a progressive era is possible. Um, so that's my feeble little
Hope.
hope. Or we might all die. That's possible too.
Yeah, yeah.
Really, the ice caps really are melting.
Yeah. Well, there are a lot of things right now that seem like wildly out of balance,
Yes.
not just sort of off,
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
but but sort of impossibly out of balance. And so how to imagine them coming back into balance is not easy. And I do think that when I read World Without Mind, my understanding of that book was that there was an agreement among the Google, Amazon, Facebook, Apple, that they would not bother each other, but together come into a kind of new type of monopoly that would be more like a monarchy, that would be, they would be the foreordained intelligentsia that would be kind of like the philosopher king or something like that, that would know more than all of us about how all of us should be. Now, if you'd said this to me 10 years ago, I'd be like, yeah, right, a bunch of nerds in Silicon Valley or something like that. But now, I mean, I have a whole different understanding from the analytics perspective. I couldn't have imagined this kind of surveillance of the, we use them, they use us, and so much. So your hope is just that politically there'll be something.
Yes, that there will be political, that the economic structure will, respond to political, yeah. I do think that, you got to change the way, you have to change the way people make money. And part of the way you change people make money is through, industrial policy. You say you can't own a newspaper if you're a broadcast station, duh. So there are those kinds of historical kind of ways to structure economic interest so that people pursuing their economic interest won't bring the world crushing down, and I do think there are ways to do that. And I'm not in that game now. I don't have the I don't have the wherewithal for it, but I do think that there are people who do have the wherewithal for it, and God love them.
So I did an interview with Diana Johnstone, who's a progressive journalist in Paris. Yeah, she's one of my pay attention interviews. She's about 87 years old, and she's been in progressive journalism, progressive politics all of her life. She's not extremely hopeful about what's going on. I mean, her sort of final word is more or less, life always changes and things do emerge, and something will emerge. Something, this won't be the end game, so to speak, but it's not as though it's easy to see how Google, Amazon, Facebook, and Apple, and then Microsoft could be reined in, and how, let's say, ordinary people are dependent now on the technology so much that it's hard to see how there isn't going to be this kind of ongoing reaping of these kinds of data harvesting, I guess.
Yeah, and to get people to pay for content is an uphill battle. That's part of it.
Oh, I know, and the idea that the internet was also going to be free.
Yeah.
and that it was going to make all kinds of knowledge available was there kind of with, the early form of it. And that was the kind of idealistic form that I first heard about. I was doubtful about it, but I thought, well, that sounds interesting, kind of along with the Hitchhiker's Guide to the Universe or whatever, we're going to have all this information. Turns out that really, really is not exactly what it is.
No.
So go ahead and tell us a little bit more about your play, and then I want to talk with you about sort of some more about surveillance, but just what it's about.
I'll just talk about the structure of the play. So it is based on this, it's a riff on this demographics material that I happened into. And it's a series of vignettes. It's very scattershot. And there are three types of scenes or vignettes. One is to try to be clear about what's actually going on. So there are little things that actually describe in a happy, zippy kind of way how clustering works. Who owns things and just how it actually works. The other type of scene is how we would react if actually individuals treated us as these corporations treat us. If our friends or anyone manipulated us to their own advantage, like these corporations manipulate us to their own all the while saying, we're your friend, we're you. We're not even your friend, we are you. I mean, it just, whoa. So that's the other part of it. And then the third part, it has these series of monologues, which are really just about subjective identity, what it is to feel to be a person. Moments when we have thought, I have come into myself, and what it is to be one's self. So those are the three types of images that I try to throw against each other to make basically just excite some brain cells,
to get people interested in these topics from a perspective.
And what I really want in each of these little vignettes to have people go, I recognize that, I recognize that, I recognize that, I recognize that, but I've never put them together like that before. That's the structure that I would am aiming for anyway.
Yeah, and I would say that's the David Phillips component. That's where your, let's say, private thinking, private self came into the mix of a whole bunch of stuff.
Yeah.
And you came up with something that you could call creative or insightful or whatever, but it required something that was specifically David Phillips. Couldn't be done by the analytics. I mean, because the AI people think that they could. They think that they could do David Phillips, and maybe do even better.
I just want to say one thing, another thing about the show, and again, this is a bit of a non sequitur, but I think it's important. One of the monologues is, in fact, of myself. Back in the beginning of the HIV crisis, when it was first, making the news, and it was called gay-related immunodeficiency. There were real concerns that it was going to hit the general population, and that radicalized me. That I was not considered part of the general population. Just the phrase, what if this moves to the general population? It's like, okay, got it. I know where I stand now.
Do you think that's changed?
Oh, in terms of gay people, sure. I mean, yeah. But there's still the general population and others. There's still, I mean, who is othered changes, but there's always the people who aren't really, collateral damage, and you see some people are important and some people are not. And you see this in the vaccine rollout, and it is, if not unconscious, so effortless as to be difficult to be aware of if you're one of the privileged, but if you're one of the others, you kind of notice it.
I do think, though, there is something universal in feeling excluded. I really do. And I think, again, it gets back to the private self thing, the thing we were talking about earlier. Because I think none of us feels actually known, really actually known. It's inherent in our nature to experience ourselves as kind of in a bubble or unknown and unseen. And so then other people don't get us. And they can't feel what we're talking about. And because of that, I think this idea of being gotten or mirrored by somebody else is very powerful, very, very seductive. It's the nature of falling in love. It's the nature of, everything. Somebody gets you. Oh, it's like mirror, mirror on the wall, you're the fairest of all, and so it's that whole issue of being excluded and being othered is kind of endless. And I know now that I'm in the old population, I'm not even in the older, I'm in the old. I don't tell my age. And partly because I feel like it's a private matter. It's like, as soon as I say it, people are going to categorize me. I don't want that category. But I can hold all of that lightly, really, actually, because I know I'm going to die and it's not going to be that long. However, there is something else that I don't hold lightly, which is that sense that, how do you actually feel, let's say, comfortable with being yourself, or embodied, or engaged, and how does that come about for me or you or anybody? Because in my profession, in my life, I truly believe that is what being human is that when you can feel engaged in a way that is authentic to your particularity with the world that may seem unknown or foreign or whatever, that's what produces whatever might be great or important about being human. So it's when that's eliminated, that's when I think people starve. They truly starve. It's not a.
Do you see that being? Tell me how you see that being eliminated. What? Tell me more about that.
I think that in this period of time where, let's say, social media are so available, that people have a very hard time just kind of groping around in regard to their own identities. I think they very easily fall into alienation because they don't look as good as their friends on Facebook, or Facebook's not even the thing anymore. I mean, Instagram or whatever the thing is, I don't, Snapchat, whatever it is, that previously, I think that people spent more time groping around and less time looking at images in a little handheld computer. And I think that leads to greater alienation rather than greater inspiration or something. So I feel like we're kind of being robbed of this capacity to have the private mind in which we grope around, and we have the experience of sort of, I don't know. Like, I don't know, I don't know really what I do look like. I don't really know what I'm thinking, I don't. So let me have a pause. Let me take a pause. Let me sort of locate myself, because I think subjectivity is really very fragmented and confusing all of the time. It doesn't ever get cleared up. But that feeling of being not good enough or set apart or I don't know, not capable of finding my way or whatever. Those feelings I think are more common now, or more, you know, moment to moment, and more serious when, you know, people are sitting. I mean, in the age group of 10 to 34, suicide has just boomed. Just boomed. 10 to 34.
When?
Since about the last 10 years.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Wow.
And you know, so I that's where I worry about,
Yeah.
you know, all of these things kind of coming in. I think the clustering and the surveillance that you're talking about and all of that is extremely seductive.
I mentioned before, I'm a confluence of cliches, and a unique confluence of cliches, and that actually really, I am disturbed by that in a way that I don't really understand yet. One of the little things I have in my show is people saying, "Oh, we have 75,000 different ways to personalize this ad," and it's just 5 different cities with the 3 different weather, 3 different kinds of weather. 5 different social roles, mother, son, daughter, whatever, and 7 different times of day, and 4 activities,
Right.
and that's 75,000 ways you can
Right.
personalize that ad, and they're all insipid distinctions, and it's a really effective advertising technique.
Yeah.
Oh, mom eating lunch when it's rainy out there in Birmingham.
Yeah.
It's like,
Yeah.
oh, hello, I'm
Mhm.
recognized.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's something,
Yeah.
and I
Yeah.
don't know how to, I'm not sure what to do about that. Or
Yeah, I mean, I actually think that until that monopoly thing can be, you know, tamped down some, I don't think there's going to be anything to do about it. Because again, you know, I was just on a trip while I was at the beach, on the beach in Florida. People had their cell phones.
yeah,
So they were walking along. They weren't really, I mean, you know, they'd look up and so on, they take a picture, but then they'd be talking to the cell phone and walking along with the cell phone. And I understand a lot about attention and awareness and how we use it and how it's available. And that was where most of the awareness and attention was.
yeah.
You know, so because it's focused, it has to be focused to actually pay attention. And, you know, we're largely unconscious. The cognitive scientists would say we're 99% unconscious. And so in order to pay attention, we have to focus. And then we have a limited amount of energy to do that. And if you're putting it largely into your devices and so on, then you aren't putting it other places. And I think that what you're talking about is that those cliches that make you feel like you're being recognized are robbing you of something else that is, let's say, more subjective. It isn't coming from the outside. And also, it may be closer to something like your, I don't know, integrity or your authenticity or your, the way that you can be just, just to be without trying to be something or somebody or something else, So it's that manipulation that worries me. And then, when I see people in therapy, there's a way that people try to formulate themselves now that are sort of based on apps and stereotypes and so on. And 10 years ago, it was based on some kind of neuroscience. Like people would say, I have a genetic proclivity to depression, instead of saying I'm in a bad mood, and so so it's always been something, but now it seems just a little more commercialized, or I don't know, marketplace oriented or something, the way people describe their lives.
Sure.
So that bothers me, and I feel your work is trying to get at that issue of
yeah.
So I'm going to change the channel a little bit because we really talked about the social dilemma and we've talked about
Mhm.
all of that part of it. So I wanted to know what your views are about 5G and 6G. I've actually interviewed a couple of people, including Paul Hérault, who is from McGill University in Montreal, and he's an expert on 5G. And he's an engineer and a chemist, and he works in essentially safety and health hazards in that area of public health. And then also Daphne Tachover, who's an Israeli lawyer who works for Robert Kennedy Jr., his team that is bringing a case against the FCC in regard to 5G.
Mhm.
And in both of their cases, and with Hérault, I came to understand what kind of technology 5G is, because it's not like just the next iteration of 4G. And then from Tachover, I came to understand the ways that it's being used for surveillance. Within the technologies that we've had, we've kind of used up a lot of the bandwidth
Mhm.
for electromagnetic radiation and so on. So 5G, we're having to go into a kind of a narrow, tight bandwidth to get it to work. And so they
Mhm.
have to put up a lot more antennas. They
Mhm.
have to bring those antennas in closer to people's everyday lives, et cetera. All of this brings in a lot more radiation and a lot more dangerous radiation than people think of. I mean, it's one thing to have 4G where you need to be careful with how you use your cell phone. When you have 5G, you're not going to really be able to escape the
Mhm.
electromagnetic radiation. So we're bringing these devices in um, with a lot of expense and a lot of there have to be satellites. Like there are already some 30 some satellites up there for them, and then a lot of antennas on the ground, and there would be other ways to bring the technology also. They would have to do with the fiber optics. Fiber optics would be safer, and fiber optics would actually be more efficient too.
Mhm. Mhm.
And so they're safer and more efficient. Why are we not using fiber optics?
Mhm.
Because the fiber optics would not allow for this surveillance. So
Hmm.
the surveillance is actually, the way I understand it, is that 5G and 6G will be kind of like a net that's cast over like cities and populations, groups of people, where you can surveil everything from where people are walking, the facial technology, pick up on because they'll have then lots of smart devices like the smart cars, smart
Mhm.
diapers that
Mhm.
communicate whether the diaper is wet or not,
Mhm.
smart fabrics, television,
Mhm.
um, refrigerators, etc. So it'll be kind of an electromagnetic world of devices that communicate with each other, but they are also picking up all of the data of the people that are living within those devices. And all of that is actually captured in a way that's kind of inescapable. It doesn't matter whether you're carrying your cell phone or not at that point, because you're going to be able to be picked up in all of the things that you're doing. And, at first I thought, so that in rural areas, is that not going to be happening? But Hérault said, no, the satellites will allow it to happen in the rural areas somehow. At least that's the plan,
Yeah.
to map out all of these areas with this electromagnetic sort of netting. And
Yeah.
then that allows us to do things like have autonomous weapons, autonomous cars,
Right.
uh, autonomous diapers,
Yeah.
lots of things that we don't really
Yeah.
need, and that
Yeah.
also potentially take away our autonomy.
Yeah.
Potentially
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
we don't think so much. We don't have to
Yeah.
drive the cars and check the diapers and
Yeah.
so on.
Yeah. 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 Yeah.
So we
Yeah.
just
Yeah.
so anyway, that's more or less my understanding of it. I mean, there's a
Okay.
lot more that Dr. Hérault was telling me in the 2 hours that we were talking.
Yeah.
And so also the FCC oversees all this because it supposedly is communication, but the FCC has nothing to do. They have no understanding of the health hazards. They play no role in regulating electromagnetic radiation. And so they've been just sort of naysayers to what has come up. And so the dangers of electromagnetic radiation and the dangers of the surveillance dangers are not being well monitored by the FCC, sort of the takeaway.
All right. Regarding the health hazard, I just can't say. I mean, it doesn't sound right because what you're talking about is the frequency and the wavelength getting smaller and smaller and smaller, and that doesn't sound offhand. That doesn't sound great either.
No,
You're not riding the waves anymore; they're eating into you.
Yeah.
So, but again, I also want to say that I am really wary of metaphors like a giant net going over all of us. That's not telling me anything except.
And well, that's my metaphor. Let me just be very clear that neither of these other people use that at all. This is a picture of my metaphor. And yes, and and certainly listen to Paul Aero. His interview with me is fabulous. But yes. So that's my metaphor. Yeah.
Okay. Regarding smart technologies in general, a loathsome phrase.
Term, yes.
I mean, you mentioned 5G in some of your emails. They talked about the Internet of Things, and that made sense. That what certainly I can see how with a little tiny wavelength and very high frequency, what that gives you is addressing potential. That means that you have a lot more address space. That is, your diaper can have a unique identifier. Each of that case of diapers can actually have a unique identifier in it, and can have a little transmitter, that will be uniquely identified, that can interface with a global communication system. So I get that 5G in that sense is an extension of the surveillance capability of the wireless system that we have and the internet that we have now. And again, mostly because from the little I know about it, it increases the address space. And I think, though, that this is where I get into my approach toward technology is we're not talking about 5G anymore. I mean, 5G is really simple. It's a high frequency wave.
Right.
It is how it is integrated into profit making.
Right.
And so the issue isn't 5G.
Right.
The issue is the smart doorbell. However it's hooked up. Whether it's hooked up by fiber optics, whether it's hooked up by Wi-Fi, however it's hooked up, this idea of the autonomous refrigerator, that's the issue. That is the issue. It's not 5G.
It's making these kinds of things the products that we want.
Yes.
And apparently it's not possible to have self-driving cars without it.
That may well be.
Right. Because the self-driving cars, and again, to when you really understand the distinction between AI and humans, what AI cannot do is make a decision because it doesn't have an emotional system. And so you're going to get a lot of mistakes with self-driving cars unless they're autonomous within a 5G kind of system, and then they're following something that is it's less likely that they're going to cause accidents.
Okay, this also is a bit of a non sequitur, but the captcha things. Are you a human? Pick out all the crosswalks.
Yeah, I know.
Isn't it remarkable that they're all about traffic? Isn't it remarkable that they're run by Google? That's a Google thing.
That's really interesting.
And they're all about navigating traffic. Is this
Yeah.
a fire hydrant, or
Yeah.
is it a crosswalk, or is it a bridge, or
It would nice harvesting for
yep,
Google
yep,
to be able
yep, yep,
to.
yep.
Yes.
And
Yes.
I often get really angry at the software that is basically saying to me, "Don't you worry your pretty little head, dear. We'll take care of that for
That's
you."
right. That's right.
And then I give in and I say, "Oh my God, my software is always up to date now."
Yes. Yes.
I
Right.
don't have to.
Yeah.
I don't
Yeah.
have to update it myself. I'll let them do it for me.
It's seductive.
It is seductive, and it's also useful. And I do believe that there is a way to separate these things. Say, yes, you actually can have assistive software,
Hmm.
that is not implicated in Google world domination. I mean, right now there isn't. Right now there isn't.
Right.
And for a while that was, I mean, I'm retired now, so
Yeah.
I'm not pursuing these things with the dedication that I did before. But I started my interest in surveillance very specifically to say, is there a way that surveillance is beneficial? Can surveillance, this surveillance as a technology of knowledge production, as a way of understanding the world, can this way of understanding the world actually be useful to anyone other than corporations? Can this be useful in other ways?
Or
Other than
government or military or whatever.
yeah, I'm less sanguine about that now. I don't
Yeah.
really think so. I mean, I think that surveillance as a way of understanding inevitably favors people who are in it for the long run, because it's about risk. It's about risk. It's about populations. It's about,
Yeah.
so long as it happens 65% of the time, I'm golden,
Yeah.
Whereas as individuals, we don't care if it happens 60%, 5% of the time. We just don't want it to happen, or we do want it to happen.
Right. Right.
So
Right.
we're engaging in a different way of understanding the world, and surveillance favors capital in that it favors large data sets, and it
Well,
favors
that's
and it favors heavy computing resources.
right.
So and there are people who are exploring ways to have a communes of data, communes of computing. So it is not completely like unimaginable, but it's pretty hard to
Yeah.
think how that's going to happen.
Right now, it seems very hard to think about it,
Yes.
to think how it would happen. And
Yeah. And so I get into good old regulation, good
I know.
good old
When you were
progressive
saying that, like,
regulation.
who is going to enact that regulation? Because to whom would it? Well, like who would benefit from the regulation? It would have to be the
I
peeps
don't know.
somehow. But
I don't know. We'll see. I mean, the next couple of years will tell.
I do.
Either the U.S. actually is in a death spiral, or it's not. And I think the next couple of years are going to tell that.
I do agree with you on that, and I think that I'm glad to hear that you say that you had started out maybe a little more optimistically about the surveillance, thinking, well, maybe there is something that can serve humanity in it, and maybe a little more optimistic about data analysis. I don't think I had that optimism ever, but I'm a little older than you, so
yeah. Not much. I guess it keeps getting smaller and smaller, Polly. But okay, let me think about. Consider epidemiology. Actually, epidemiology is surveillance.
Yeah.
And epidemiology can be a public service.
Okay. Well,
of course, there's always filth. I'm not talking about anything being pure, but somehow there is a public service aspect to epidemiology.
Right.
Things like environmental injustice, when you say, well, where are where are the toxic waste dumps?
Yeah.
That requires
Yeah.
data,
Yeah. That's true.
that
That's
requires
true.
data, and that requires surveillance. And so there is a role
Yeah.
for it.
Yeah.
What I think has to happen, and this I'm actually not entirely pessimistic about, because I see it happening. People understand my work better than they did 15 years ago. I can now explain what I do, and my students say, oh. And
Oh.
15 years ago, it would be like, this is how surveillance works. And we'd spend a
Uh-huh.
course talking about how surveillance works. And
Uh-huh.
now, that's why I had retired. It's like, oh, God, here's something new. um, um, uh,
Or
so
more
so I
people
have, yeah, so
understand.
my hope is that as people understand it, they actually have forms of resistance. I mean, they have a desire to resist. They know when they're being manipulated. I think people
Yeah.
are getting uh, more aware of the way
Yeah.
that of the way they're being used and the way they're being manipulated. And what there's still this I don't care going on. There's no harm. I mean, they don't really see the harm, uh, so far as I can tell, because it used to be, what do I care how much Facebook knows about me? And
Right.
now people know why they should care how much Facebook knows about them, but they still think, eh, you know,
Yeah.
uh, there's
It's
what,
like
what can I do
it
about it?
doesn't matter.
There's no
Yeah.
organization around it. But I do think that there is the possibility for awareness and organized political action. It helps me go to sleep at night to think that maybe that's all that is a way that I can go to sleep at night not being in despair. Um, but uh, uh, but it's not all that. If you look for it, you can see it.
Well, I think, some playwrights, novelists, artists have understood.
Hmm.
They're often the people who are the sort of social conscience
Hmm.
of whatever the problems are in society. You find, again, the individuals
Hmm.
who are working kind of creatively. Um, I I think that the problem of caring
Yes.
is an issue that is more subtle than
Yeah.
other issues, and it does have to do with, uh, it, in my view, at least, what I would say is sort of a battle between transhumanism and humanism. And I think those battle lines will be drawn. And I think that issues
Mhm.
involving the US are going to be drawn around some of those battle lines. And truly, I didn't know anything about that term transhumanism until
Mhm.
about, I'd say, 3 years ago.
Mhm.
And even when I first learned about it, because I was on a panel on immortality
Yeah.
that I happened into in New York, like they needed a Buddhist on the panel. I was I was at I was at a dinner party, and there were these people talking. This guy, we need a Buddhist on this panel. Well, what's the panel? Well, the panel is on immortality. What do you think about immortality? I said, I'm against it. They said, oh, you're perfect. You're perfect. You're perfect. So I got to be on this panel with all of these transhumanists. And I didn't know they existed before. And they were heavily into immortality.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I couldn't, I'd never heard of this except,
Yeah.
for going back to
Yeah.
Gilgamesh, and then,
Yeah.
the whole sort of desire for immortality in humans. I thought that was way over. I thought that was
Mhm.
gone with the with the Greeks or something. But
Mhm.
so I think that until you understand what it means to be human in some
Yeah.
way that is deep enough that you value the impermanence, that you value this sort of subtle nature of your particularity, the
Yeah.
sort of, until you sort of get that in a bigger way, I think it's hard to be very concerned about where your attention is going and for what reason, you
Hmm.
know.
Hmm.
And so it doesn't matter if you carry your cell phone around all the time or you're heavily into social media and they find out all about you, so what, you know,
Mhm.
it's all somehow. So because yes, maybe you care that, you know, there are these incredible wealth generating organizations that make it impossible for ordinary people to even imagine that they're free to do things in their lives or whatever.
Yeah.
And maybe you care that about the
Right.
0.001% or whatever, but none of those things will really sort of like be very clearly personal and private to you until you get, I think, the bigger
Yeah.
issues about what it means to
Yeah.
be here, how brief it is, you know,
Yeah.
that whole thing. Did you read
Yes.
The Circle or have you seen the movie?
I've seen The Circle.
You've seen the,
I saw it, and I kind of only remember that I didn't like it that much. I don't know why. I don't even
what
remember.
the movie wasn't as good as the book, I would
Okay.
say. You
All
know,
right.
I mean, so it's
Okay.
Dave Eggers' book, and I don't know
Yeah.
that much about Dave Eggers, but what I liked about the book is that the main character, May,
Yes.
is really naive and wants the best for everybody, you
Yes.
know, and she walks into essentially the Google environment
Mhm.
and
Mhm.
she subscribes to everything.
Mhm. Mhm.
And the only people opposing it are the people who are crushed. You know, one of them commits suicide, and
Mhm.
these are the people that are trying to stay off of the technology.
Mhm.
You know, they're trying to sort of stay outside of it, but you don't you don't quite get it until near the end of the book. The movie makes it a much bigger, I think, kind of to do at the. But you get in the end that the control is really the control of all of your thoughts and feelings, and it's not simply about, you know, epidemiology and making your
Right.
life safer and so on.
Right.
It's really
Right.
a much bigger project than that.
Right.
And while that book doesn't go so much towards the transhumanism thing, when you get into the transhumanism thing, you see that it's about utter control.
Mhm.
It is really about creating an environment where some people get to live for a very, very long
Yeah.
time
Yeah.
because they control
Huh.
everything, you
Huh.
know. And so that's a kind of Nietzschean
Yeah.
kind of thing, Superman type of thing. But I
Yeah.
that's why I mean I think that the surveillance part of this
Mhm.
can only really sound bad to people if they can see and know what it's doing to them.
Right. I did some research on the quantified self, where these are people who fit, but this was back when Fitbits were kind of new
Oh,
things.
right, right,
People who are
right,
constantly tracking
right,
themselves, all right,
right,
making data, and using their own data, and sort of, it's got this, empowerment kind of thing to it, take control of your own data and know thyself. But there's also a real transhumanist thing too,
mm,
because it's like, I must be ideal.
right,
My body must be, I can make my body perfect.
right,
Um, and in order to, uh, there's always, anytime you're going for improvement, you're going towards some goal, towards some ideal, and it's like, well, you know, what is it that you want to be? And as not, it's an entrepreneur. I want to be a successful entrepreneur in Silicon Valley,
yeah, right.
Oh, and all of those things are actually
Forever,
really,
forever.
yes, yeah. And all of those things are like really kind of related to, again, the current economic paradigm of, gig economy, that you really are responsible for your own health, for showing up on time, for, to have your tools with you all the time. So all of these things are about optimizing the self in order to fit with an economic paradigm that will not reward you otherwise.
That's right.
Won't reward you very much, even if you're doing it all right, but it's not going to reward you at all if you're not taking responsibility for all these things.
So I think I sent you something that I saw from Alison McDowell. Alison McDowell is a Philadelphia person.
Yes.
Somebody sent me her website, Wrench in the Gears, and it's about the capitalization of this social kind of behavior stuff.
Yes.
And when I listened to her, I was like, oh my God, this is even a whole other level that I had never even imagined. But I could quickly imagine it.
Yeah.
I could quickly see how all this interactive gear and material and so on, and the way it's set up for kids and education, and then the way it's set up for individuals who would be, working in their own gig economy. And so you get rated on everything, you get feedback for everything, and then you actually are going to be deprived if you don't play your part.
Right.
And yet the game that's going on is the game that's being played by whoever they are, the Google, Amazon, Facebook, Apple team, whoever the technocrats are, they're playing the game at a whole other level.
Right. Yes.
You're playing at a tiny little level. If you understood that, if you truly could see that, I think that could be a breaking point. That could be a place in which you say, no, I'm not going to engage with this. I think that the period of time that we have been in since you and I have kind of come on the earth has been, to some extent, for Western cultures, more and more about control, about essentially prediction and control. And that has come into individual lives. And, many people try to stay safe, predict and control, and they try to do that with everything from their diet to their dreams, to their children, to their home environments and recycling and the way they do everything. And actually, it fits really well with a machine. It's because you can predict and control machines much better than you can with humans. I mean, one thing that you come to know in psychotherapy over time is that you're not perfectible. You got to love yourself the way you are, because you're not going to be somebody else, and you're not going to get a new personality grafted onto you or something. And that quality of love, which is to love vulnerability, to me, that's really what human love is that we love vulnerability. We don't really love perfection. That doesn't belong to humans, that belong to the gods. And we never cared that much about them anyway. So I think that if we could see that somehow this kind of surveillance, this kind of data analysis, this kind of way of life is actually dehumanizing us, and that the transhuman thing is not better, it's just different. It's really different. I do think that there would be more people wanting out of the game, because they're not going to be able to play the game at this high level.
I'm about to completely change the topic.
Please do.
As we have hopeful change, hope for change. One thing that you need is for people to think there's a problem, that in fact it's not okay. And then the other thing you need is a little hope, and tools for thinking that you can in fact engage, that there is a way around this. And so I just want, before we go, because this actually is a part, I think, of my scholarship. I think I brought this, if you will, to surveillance studies, a particular model of surveillance, a way to think about surveillance. And I offer this because if you see it if you have a framework that admits of complexity, but without being overpoweringly chaotic, it's like, oh, I can deal with this part, or I can deal with this part, or I can deal with this part, or I can deal with this part. And, you know, it's, you don't have to deal with the whole thing all at once.
All at
So
once.
I just want to define surveillance. Okay. Okay. So this is what I call actuarial surveillance. Some people call it data valence, but it's a particular, you know, it's a particular kind of surveillance. I just want to kind of narrow what I'm talking about, and for the moment we'll call it actuarial surveillance. And in order to have a surveillance process, you need unique identifiers. So every element of the population has to be uniquely identified. You need a serial number, you need a name, and our unique identifiers are often our cell phone numbers. They're pretty good, you know. So something that is, you know, uniquely identifies each body. Each body has a unique name. And then the other thing you have to do is use that identifier to link the body to a database. All right. So, you know, you have your PIN, you know, your ATM card is in fact in a way unique identifier. You have it on your body. It's you're the only one with that number, and you have a way of linking that ATM card number to your bank account. All right. So you have a way of linking bodies to databases. You have to be able to translate activities into data. The sort of actual monitoring of activities and saying, oh, you know, this entity has you know, put in this Google term, and so we're going to link that activity to that entity in this database. All right, so you have to be able to model activities in data. And then you have a analytic technique. You have all this data over here. All this data is linked to identifiers in some way. You know who did each of these things, and then you analyze them, and you produce knowledge of some kind, and you apply that knowledge back into the world. So I offer that particularly because there are a million different ways to have a unique identifier. There are a million different choices for how to uniquely identify people, or objects, or tires, or whatever, you know. The identifier can be global. It can be very particular. You're not allowed to use your healthcare number. You're in Canada. You may not use your healthcare card number for any other purpose other than healthcare. Right? It is a unique identifier, but it's constrained in law and practice to a particular way use. There are a million different ways of linking bodies to databases. There are just countless ways to do that. There are ways to do it so that you can go one way and not the other way. You can link the body to the database, but from the data, you can't get back to the body. Right? So there are many, many ways to structure that. There are many, many ways to structure the actual monitoring. You know, there are so many ways to they say this can be monitored, this can't be monitored. If we change this into data, it's going to be changed in this particular format. And all of these things make a difference. They are choices that make a difference. There are a million different ways to analyze data. Are you allowed to use gender? Are you allowed to use gender or race? Are you allowed to use markers of gender and race? When you come up with an analysis that is has disparate effect, you know, are you allowed to do that? You know, and so there are a million different ways of analyzing data, and there are a million different ways of applying data back to the population. So as we are able to break that up, then you have the possibility for doing things like, you know, creating model regulation, you know, that and it just gives you choices. And it not only gives you choices, but when you think of the choice about any of these things as not being just a technical choice, but a technical, political, cultural, economic choice, then it gives everybody the way to say, oh, you know, I can't deal with the technology, but I get the point, so I'm going to write a pop tune, you know? So it's everybody a way of engaging.
To enter
So
into.
this is what I try. This is what I actually have tried to do in my classes. I have one particular class where that's basically what I try to do. I try to say, break it apart. Find a surveillance system, break it apart into identification. Link to the database, monitoring, analysis, response to the world, and choose one of those. And any way you want, think how you could engage with just that little bit of it.
I think what you're saying is there are a lot of ways to enter in.
Yes.
To the overall
Yes.
system and
Yes.
make a difference and make a change.
Yes.
So we don't have to think about the entirety of this kind of surveillance being
Yes.
problematic.
Yes.
We can think about changing something within it to make it more humane or more
Yes.
engaging in a way that
Yes.
leads to the outcomes
or less racist, for example.
Yeah, that's a whole other conversation.
Look at coded bias. Do really, really, really check out coded bias.
Coded bias, I will check that out. And I like to think about, when I talk about anti-racism, and I've talked with a number of people, and I also do some consulting on it, to start, just to begin with, always is, what do you mean by race? And that very issue, that bit of data, is very, very significant. And the way it got going and the way it got applied and so on, to break that has been difficult. Because actually it's been used as a cliche or a stereotype. And so by breaking that, by seeing that there are not races, but there is racism, like many things that we use, and we use to increase power for some and to oppress others, we use without examining what it is that we're doing and using those categories. And I think that, on the plus side of the issues surrounding data analysis and surveillance, it may be that we come to the whole universe of issues about how these kinds of differences are formulated and how they're used by those who have more power, or those who want to enslave others, or those who want to use others as resources, and so on. That possibly we will be able as humans to stop doing that. It's possible, I think. I think we're far distanced from it, but one thing I like very much about humans is that we can think about our thoughts and feelings. We can take a step back. Other animals don't do that. And so we have a certain kind of freedom that is not available to our fellow animals here. And so my on the good side of all of this, I think, wow, maybe Google, Amazon, Facebook, Apple are bringing us something that is so big and so awful that it's really going to teach us a big lesson. We're going to learn this now for all of time and space, that we're not going to do this stuff again.
We'll
but
caves.
well, we will, but it seems like we've taken this thing of stereotyping, cliches, oppression, mastery, slavery. It seems like we've taken it about as far as it goes. I mean, it's only been fairly recently that humans have even wanted to stop doing that. So I think that your idea of surveillance having all these entry points and having people think about, just what is your barcode, or how are you going to get in to understanding where you would want a barcode and where you wouldn't want a barcode, and to realize that this is a human endeavor. It's not being run by AI. It's being run by humans all the way up. They're humans, as far as I know. They're not transhumans yet. I mean, they're wanting to be immortal. It's roughly, really, there are large numbers apparently, according to one of the physicists on this panel, of men, he said, in their 30s who decapitated themselves so they could preserve their heads in cryogenics, so that when the body was perfected, the head could be grafted back onto it. I mean, it's beyond what you would think, because again, the idea of this perfection, of this human organism, to make it something that could be immortal, that could be perfect.
In a way, that's my hope too, because that just seems so bound to fail,
Oh,
It's
yes.
like, I don't have to worry about living in that world, because come on.
I know. It's like, that's way bizarre, but there's apparently a lot of it. There's a lot more than what I would ever think. I mean, I can't remember the name of the book that guy wrote, but I read the book. And and he's a physicist, and I mean, this isn't apparently so unusual. Google has a whole company that's devoted to immortality. And so it's a way of thinking, it's a way of understanding why we're here and what we're doing. But it does seem extreme, and things have seemed to have gotten so extreme. And so maybe that extreme really is the thing that will, in the end, move back to the human. But I hope that, I hope you and I get to talk again sometime soonish. And also that people will watch your play, because it's on your website, and we'll post your website. And I hope you get to continue also working with theater to put these ideas out. I know that will have to happen after the COVID shutdown ends, I guess. Or
I was supposed to have spent the past year actually making that into a publishable script, but somehow it didn't happen.
Now you could do it as a Netflix series.
Yeah.
That's where or maybe not Netflix, but one of those flick series.
Right.
So it's really been fun to talk. I've enjoyed it tremendously.
Yes.
And so thank you for doing this. Thank you for sharing so effortlessly and authentically. And I hope we will see each other in person someday in the near future. Okay. Thank you.
All right. Thank you.
Bye, David.
Bye-bye.